Help me welcome Steve Gilliland.
My background is in baseball, and if you can't tell by my voice, Brown on second, Rodriguez on first, bottom of the third. Here's the 2-2 pitch of the way just inside ball 3. Now, if you're going to do that professionally, here's a tip. Do it for a good team. I asked the late, great Harry Carey. I'm 27 years old. I said, Harry, how'd you survive broadcasting all these years? And he said, well, what are you alluding to, young man? I said, well, you announced for the Cubs. It's had to have been tough. I said, how do you survive 162 games? I will never forget what he said. A one-word answer, and it was alcohol. And then I heard him late in a game. Now, understand, baseball, very, very, very big around the world, but especially here in America, baseball, it just seems like there's so many traditions. Harry had his own tradition late in his career. To survive some of those long games, he did exactly what he said. And I heard him do this one night, and if I had it on audio, I'd sell it. I heard him do this, 8th inning of the game, late in his career. Here's the 2-2 pitch in the way, here's your drive. Hit way back, way back. Second baseman hauls it in. And it was at that moment I realized Budweiser makes the ball seem to fly further.
When your wife doesn't travel with you to an event in Maui and she says, how's the hotel? You just say things like, it's all right. What's the view like? Just a bunch of leaves and some, You do not tell your wife that you're looking out at the ocean. She said to me today, she said, when you're finished, she said, what are you going to do? I said, I'll just probably stay in my room. See you at the pool. But I checked into a hotel one time, and I tell people this all the time. I said, when you check into a hotel, you ever have this happen to you? Now, I don't get this. You walk in, and they're like, yes. Do you have a reservation? You see, I think that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. You fly from Charlotte to Dallas and then Dallas to L.A. You get a car service to take you to the hotel. They drop you off. Then you bring all your luggage into the lobby. I had that happen to me. And a girl said, you have a reservation? I said, no. I said, I flew from Charlotte to Dallas, Dallas to L.A. I brought all my luggage into the lobby. Just say hi to you.
I'm going to challenge you to do one thing as a result of being here at the 2011 annual $1 Million Roundtable meeting. I want you to ask yourself, who put you here? Who put you here? Who influenced your life? Who made a difference in your life? And before you leave here, I want you to, on a flight, start making a list of those people that you would have on that list of people that made a difference in your life. I made that list. And it was amazing when I began to make my list, who made my list. Of course, my mom made my list. And I realized this incredible audience is made up of a lot of diversity, but I have to share my heart. My mother is a King James Version, front row, Bible spitting, spewing, John 3:16, for God's world, you better have your life right Baptist. And if you ever sit beside my mother in an airplane, you will meet God. At least her version of the higher being. But I got to tell you something. She was there when I needed her. She was my rock. She was my strength. Guess who else makes my list? My secretary, Margaret. I call them Margaretisms. In my new book, Making a Difference, I put a lot of Margaretisms. Why? Because Margaret was wise way beyond her years. Margaret taught me how to enjoy the ride. But when I spoke at Margaret's funeral, I will never forget, I walked into the church and my jaw dropped and I looked out and I said, wow, 850 people packed a church to pay tribute to a woman who impacted so many lives. I said to one of her neighbors, I said, "So you are?" She said, "I'm her neighbor." I said, "Tell me a little bit about her." Said, "She just lit up a room when she walked in, but she always, always told you what you needed to hear, not what you wanted to hear." My wife makes my list. I was backstage with Bill Cates, and Bill said, "Man," he said, "how's that work out?" I said, "Works out good." I said, "She understands my schedule." I said, "Being a former flight attendant, she understands." And then I had that, fourth person. I wasn't sure where I was going to head with that one. But before I leave you, I'm going to tell you the fifth and final person who made my list, who, ladies and gentlemen, puts me in Atlanta, Georgia today. A sixth grade teacher. Margaret may have taught me how to enjoy the ride, but a sixth grade teacher influenced my life and made such a difference that's why I'm here. Now, I don't know why you're here. You're saying, no, I understand how you end up here. I'm saying who influenced you to be here? Who gave you that voice to be here? I was being drugged down the hall by my ear in sixth grade. These were the good old days. I don't know if you remember the good old days. Some of you do. That's back when if you threw something in the cafeteria, all of a sudden your hand was slapped. There was no counting. 1, 2, 3. I was at a grocery store one time, some woman started counting. She said, "If I get to 5, Billy," I heard my mother under her breath say, "Take her to 5, Billy." When she got to 4.5, my mother hollered, "5, whack 'em!" And then I heard Christine, she almost referenced timeout. I want to know one thing from this international audience. What the heck is a timeout? Look, I want to see hands. How many ever got a timeout? I never got a timeout. How many ever, who never got a timeout? I never got a timeout. I said to my mother, "I never got a timeout." She said, "You want a timeout?" She said, "I'll put you to the mat and you won't come up." But I went back to verify the story so I could share it with you. That sixth grade teacher who was dragging me down the hall got intercepted by the gentleman that's in my new book, the gentleman that made a big difference in my life, a gentleman that helped me enjoy the ride, a gentleman that's on my list. Now, I'm 30 years old. Hey, when you're young and good looking and in shape, you can say, "Yeah, well, I'm 43. It ain't happening with me. But that math teacher looked up at his social studies homeroom teacher and said, "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "I want to know what you're doing. What's going on here?" That social studies teacher asked him, and that math teacher looked at him and said, "What do you think's going on? Who's involved?" He said, he said, "He's a jerk. He just disrupts everything." Because of time, let me share the short version. I get taken to the principal's office, fortunately that day, by my homeroom teacher, who said, "Let me take him." And that math teacher said, "He's all yours." Sitting in front of that homeroom teacher looked at me and said, "I've seen your standardized test scores, and I want to know one thing. How can a kid score that high and never make an A in first, second, third, fourth, or fifth grade?" I began to cry, and I said, "You really want to know?" You see, back then, I'd have done anything for your attention. I said, "You have any idea what it's like to be hiding under a bed with your older brother? When you hear your dad screaming at your mother, and you hear your dad say, 'I'm leaving and you'll never see me again,' and you tell that little one, that youngest, you tell him, 'You're the one who wanted 2. I wanted 1. Now you deal with it.'" You see, I'd have done anything. But thank goodness it was a sixth grade teacher who looked at me with tears in his eyes, streaming down his face. And he stood up and he said, "All that aside, I have no idea what you're going through, but I do know this." And he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You've got a lot of promise, and I'm going to be there for you." He showed up to my Little League games. He showed up to my junior high games. He showed up to my high school games. When I graduated from high school after making my first A in sixth grade, when he showed up at my graduation in high school, I gave him a big hug. But it was A few years ago, when the Pittsburgh Business Times recognized my company as one of the fastest growing privately held companies in the region, I went to get an award, and as I went to get the award, it was at a downtown hotel, and I was all excited, but I was also nervous. My mom was with me. They called my name and the name of my company, and before I knew it, I was standing there thanking a lot of people. When I went to leave the hotel lobby, I heard a gentleman say, Steve Gilliland. And I turned, and there was an elderly man. He said, would you come over here, please? I said, sure. He said, I came down here. He said, you don't know me, but I'm from your hometown. I said, what's my hometown? He told me. I said, yeah, that's where I'm from. I said, tell me again. He said, I drove my neighbor down. He's not allowed to drive. He's over here in the sofa. I walked around the sofa, and there sat an elderly man, tears shooting down his face. No, he wasn't invited to the event, but when he saw it in the paper, he said to me, the neighbor said, he came across, he said, that's him. I know it's him. When I turned around to that sofa, and I looked, and he looked at me, and he said, I always knew you had a lot of promise. I said, Mr. Reed, he said, I wouldn't have missed this for the world.
I just walked into the building. I'm all suited up, and I said to the receptionist, Donna, my secretary arrives this morning. Thinking I was going to intimidate her, here's what she said back to me. I know. I said, Donna, what's so funny? She said, you don't know Margaret. And then I got mad. I said, you give Margaret a message from me. You tell her when she hits this building, there's a new sheriff in town. Walking away, and she said, okay, deputy. Let me ask you a question. You ever had a customer try to get your goat? Customers can only get your goat if they find your goat. Do not bring your goat to work. Because if you do, they will find your goat, untie your goat, and ride your goat through the parking lot. And for some of you still struggling, that's a metaphor.
I finished writing that book, and there was so much publicity about it, and before I knew it, it was on the bestsellers list, and before I knew it, my neighbors were coming and congratulating me, and before I knew that, I was sending out a lot of free books to a lot of neighbors' friends. But 2 years after I wrote the book and was traveling around the world speaking, my wife had that book on an end table one night when I come home, and I saw the tears shoot down her face. And I said, what's wrong, sweetie? She said, I just want to tell you something. Please don't take this wrong. And I said, what's that? She said, I think you're an incredible father. She said, I couldn't ask for more than a husband. She said, everything I've ever dreamed. She said, everybody loves you. But she said, do me one favor. I said, I'll do anything for you. And the tears streaming down. She handed me my book and said, live your book. It's one thing. It's one thing to have the principles. It's one thing to have the message. It's one thing to sit here and listen to all the great speakers. Now what you have to do is apply it. One person in your company who is driven with enough purpose and fueled with enough passion and defined with enough pride, one person in your organization can change the climate of that organization. Thank you so much.